Welcome back. In this episode of Oxygen Not Included, we're going to be taking the Natural Gas Geyser power plant to the absolute limit. Now, in the last video, we explored just how crazy this Natural Gas Geyser power plant can get, and you can scale it up very, very large. However, I left it with a bit of an open-ended question of just how big can we go? And let me tell you what, you guys absolutely blew up the comment section. I mean, there's 160 comments on this video alone, and about all of them are at least this long, and several of them are like multiple pages. And of all those comments, I would say at least a third of them is running through different calculations to try to figure out just how many natural gas generators and fertilizer makers it takes. And for the first time in my life, I got a taste of what it must feel like to be a math teacher. And kudos to math teachers, because once I got through about 5 comments of people doing math, I was tired of reading comments about people doing math. I mean, just to give you an idea of how large some people are able to scale this thing, look at like Momalize right here. Look at this base. Are you kidding me? This is like insanity right here. And I think Thomas here set a new record for the longest comment I've ever read. That's actually like legitimately serious all the way through. Now, the one thing that ties all of these awesome comments together is that there is a lot of math involved in this setup right here. So this whole power plant has, you know, the natural gas geyser itself, all of the generators, all the different fertilizer makers, the carbon dioxide, the polluted water, the clean water, and all these different rates that are being converted, and, you know, not to mention all the power that goes along with that. So I needed an easy way to not only calculate this, but to visually show it so that I can communicate that with you guys. So last night I spent an hour working on a calculator, and this is what I came up with. Now, before I get into details of what this calculator is modeling and how it all works, let me show you its physical representation in the game. So this system right here is running completely off of polluted water. So the polluted water is pumping over to the fertilizer makers, that's giving off the natural gas, and the natural gas is going back on over to the generator, which is then giving off carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide gets cleaned, it consumes a bit of water, and then produces more polluted water. That power is then stored and fed back through everything, and you get a little bit of extra power out of this entire operation. And this leads us to the key understanding that we need to have in order to figure out just how big we can scale one of these natural gas power plants. Because if you remember back to the last 2 videos, the 2 outputs we had from the natural gas power plant down here was the polluted water and electricity. So if we figure out a rate that we consume the polluted water with a setup like I just showed you right there, we can then figure out just how large we can scale this natural gas geyser power plant. Now let me explain my calculator. There's 2 parts to it. On top, everything is just modeling things like the natural gas generator, the air scrubber, the fertilizer, the air pump that's going to be in the natural gas, the polluted water pump, and all of those different things. And those are all running at a 1-to-1. So each one of these is a quantity of 1, each one of these has a duty cycle of 1. Now the duty cycle here is the percentage of how much that equipment is going to operate within 1 cycle of the game. So right down here on the bottom is the same setup, except for what I'm doing is I'm using the duty cycle as my multiplier. So all of my numbers over here on the right are looking back to that duty cycle and then multiplying its results. So for example, just looking at the fertilizer maker up here, I have 1. So looking at the fertilizer maker up here, I know that it gives off 20 grams a second of natural gas. That is also 12 kilograms a day. But looking down here at the bottom, I have quantity of 3 with a duty cycle of 3. So the number is 60 grams a second, or 36 kilograms a day. Now let's take a look at that natural gas air pump that's right there with all the fertilizer makers. So this guy right here. Up here on top, if that unit is running continuously, it will move 500 grams a second, or 300 kilograms a day. However, to understand just how much that pump needs to run in a day, I look down here on the bottom. And what I've done is I've calculated the duty cycle. In order to do that, I took the natural gas that I can move, which is 500 grams a second, and then I divided out the rate at which I'm making natural gas, which is only 60. So that gave me a duty cycle of 0.12. So when we look at this column right here, you'll notice that the outfeed of the fertilizer makers matches the infeed of that natural gas air pump right there. So therefore, I know that my equation is balanced. And over here on the left, I know how many units I need. So in this case, I'm just rounding up my duty cycle to the next nearest number. So I need 1 natural gas air pump in order to run this system that has 3 fertilizer makers in it. With that in mind, I can also calculate the amount of power that it will consume on average. So if we come on over here to the right side, we'll see the average watts or joules a second, or the amount of kilojoules in a day right here. So once you apply that to all the different equipment that we have inside of here, I can come up with the theoretical total kilojoules a day. So for this system where I'm running 3 fertilizer makers constantly at a duty cycle of 1 to 1, I should be in theory generating 222 kilojoules of power a day. Alright, since this is a theoretical representation of the system that is running behind me, let's go ahead and check these results as compared to what we get off the reports. So the amount of kilojoules in a day I should be able to create here is 480. Of that, I'm going to burn some, as we can see all of these numbers right down here. And then my net should be around 222. So taking a look at the cycle that just finished right here, I was able to generate 483 kilojoules in a day. I removed 263 kilojoules, and that gave me a net of 222 kilojoules. So what we can see there is that the production, at least in this cycle, was a little bit off by just a few kilojoules. I mean, not much. 480 as compared to 3.6. That's the difference right there. The net was still very accurate. If we look at the previous cycle right here, I created 480.3, and then the net was 218. So we're still within 2 kilojoules right there. And then look at this, 219.9, so that's very, very close. 217.5, 219.9. So it is very, very close. So what we can learn there is that the calculator is really quite accurate for what we're doing here in game, and that there is a slight variance from cycle to cycle of how the system is operating. Now that I have a great calculator that I can use to figure out just how many fertilizer makers and all that good stuff I can run off of polluted water, I really need to understand exactly what I can get out of this natural gas geyser. Now we've already done an experiment, so I have the amount of polluted water I can get out of that. But there was a comment that was really talking about how you could separate both the natural gas geyser and the little power plant that comes along with that from the fertilizer makers and all the stuff that goes along with that. You don't need to have these two right next to each other. There can be 2 different pieces to this power plant. So if you think about this in a larger scale, you could have a couple of natural gas geyser setups that are running here, there, and everywhere, and maybe some of them use more polluted water to like run for irrigation as compared to running more fertilizer makers or whatever. But they can all pipe up to one central fertilizer maker farm. Main idea being that you can really bring a lot of different things together to make something absolutely crazy, but we have to understand this element all by itself. Luckily for me, I've already done a couple of experiments, so I have some numbers that I can deduce from. Can you see it? There's all these little webs and stuff. It's all coming together. Now the key information from my last experiment was the amount of kilojoules I was able to create in a day, and that number was 782 kilojoules. So down here I have my geyser model set up. So I'm going to go ahead and calculate the duty cycle for that. So I'm going to use a quick calculation, 782.22 divided by the amount that a natural gas generator can operate at full steam, which is 480. That in turn gives me a duty cycle of 1.63. So that gives me the first key piece to my puzzle. I need to be able to get this to 97.78 grams a second of natural gas in order to balance my equation here. So now I'll just start working through the problem. So what have we learned thus far? Well, I now have a calculation that shows how much this system uses when just running off of the natural gas geyser itself. So with that in mind, we have a bunch of these duty cycles that are less than the unit quantity that we currently require just for the geyser itself. So we can kind of tap into some of that once we start adding fertilizer makers onto this system. So for things like air pumps and the water pumps, you can see that these are very, very low compared to how much they can actually do in a day. So we can reuse that a bunch of times. Same goes for the air scrubber, right? 0.45. So we can use the other 0.55 of that. So we know that the 2 outputs we have from the gas geyser system itself is polluted water and electricity. So of that, we have 334.89 kilograms a day of polluted water, and then a theoretical yield of 713 kilojoules a day. So if you remember 334 as compared to the previous day, that's the same number right there. So good to see that the numbers are adding up. But this is the key number right there, 334.89. So now I can figure out just how many fertilizer makers I can run off of this. So this is where things get really interesting. We know exactly how much is coming off of the natural gas geyser and all of its supporting equipment. So we know what those numbers are. However, now we're going to add fertilizer makers, and what we have to do is calculate just how many fertilizer makers we can run off of what this system is doing and all of the supporting equipment that goes along with it. For a better visualization of what's going on here, we have to go up to this system, which I showed at the very beginning. So this system here is running completely off of polluted water and running these fertilizer makers at a 1-to-1 duty cycle. So these duty cycles for the fertilizer makers is running at 100%. So at that point, we can calculate what all the rest of the supporting equipment is running and to figure out just how much and everything we need. At this point, I think we can agree that this system is quite complicated. I mean, trying to explain this in a comment, that's probably why they're all so long. I mean, look at how much calculations and stuff I got going on here. It's crazy. So what I'm going to do is figure out one fertilizer maker. So one fertilizer maker is going to be my duty cycle that I'm going to start with. Everything else is going to be calculated off of that. So I'm going to balance all of my equations off of this row right here. So by comparing the two systems, what I've come up with is 15.58 fertilizer makers that I can run. So that's the duty cycle there, requiring 16 fertilizer makers. So now that I know that number, I went ahead and put it back here on the fertilizer maker for the duty cycle, and now I know the duty cycle of all the supporting equipment around it. So the last step to this problem is to combine the total fertilizer system and all of its duty cycles to the geyser system, and that way I will understand exactly how much equipment I have, and I should be able to get the correct total kilojoules a day and all of the right quantity of all the supporting equipment. I like this. This is pretty awesome. This is kind of a ridiculous math problem, but it's good stuff. I'll tell you what. So up here on the total system, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this number plus the number below it. And there you have it. That's the total number. I can take this and I can just drag it down. And bam, that is the total system numbers right there. So there you have it. That is the total system per my calculations. And we can see that the equations here balance out. So the sum of the polluted water I have at the end of the day should be 0. And the natural gas is the rate at which I'm consuming it from the geyser. So that's one external factor completely done. And then the two things that I'm going to yield out of this system is fertilizer, and that'll be at 1,021 kilograms a day. And then the total kilojoules a day I'll get is 1,722.33. So that completes my system for one natural gas power plant. So you can see right here, the polluted water I have left over at the end of the day is 0. The amount of natural gas I'm consuming is what I've calculated to be the rate at which that natural gas geyser is emitting on average, so 97.78 grams a second. And then my two things that I'm getting as yield is 121 kilograms of fertilizer a day, which is quite a bit, and then 2,870 watts on average, or 1,722 kilojoules a day. I mean, think about what you can use that for. So for all of you guys that were taking this on as a serious math challenge, you can compare your results compared to mine and see how that all worked out for you. Although a lot of these comments were also saying what it would take for a certain amount of power and all that stuff, so we weren't necessarily calculating the exact same thing, so you have to keep that in mind. Now, putting all that math aside, I know it was a lot, it was pretty heavy today. Let's go ahead and build a system. All right, so here is my system all put together here. You can see over here I have all of my fertilizer makers. I've got the natural gas geyser back here with the pump on top of that. I also have all of my generators over here on the left. If we take a look at the power grid, you can see that I'm using the heavy watt wire to power all of my transformers. So one down here and a bunch up there. I have this gas pump here that's critical, isolated on its own battery and transformer. And then I have everything else kind of bridged off from there. Switching over to my liquid system, we can see I'm bringing in clean water here to the air scrubbers. So it's coming all the way down here. And then all of the polluted water is directly going into the fertilizer makers. So straight out of the air scrubbers into the fertilizer makers, as well as the pump down here whenever that runs. And then finally, looking at the gas system, everything that is coming from the right. So we have all that natural gas running to the generators, and all of the carbon dioxide is going to be exhausting into the same chamber here. So the polluted water that's going to be dripping off of these generators is going to cool the generator, as well as some of the carbon dioxide that it's exhausting as well. So that all should work together to kind of hopefully keep that area cool, or relatively cool, underneath the melting point temperature of the generators. That's the hope. Alright, so moment of truth. Let's see how this system works. Here we go, we're powering things up. Starting to move that liquid around. Might actually start running this gas pump as well once we get enough natural gas in this area. Alright, so things are starting to turn on and get running. Alright, so I did have a mesh tile here at one point to kind of liquid cool the air scrubbers, and then I went away from that and went with gas permeable. In the startup phase, it's important to have that mesh tile over here. So I'll go back to having that. So there we go. These were just getting a little bit hot. Now they're nice and cold. Okay, so I noticed a couple of things over here. The gas vent is starting to over-pressurize, which may cause a problem for these natural gas generators. So it's over 2 kilograms of carbon dioxide up there in the top left, but only 1,000 down here. Alright, so it looks like the system is up and running now. We're up to pressure inside of here, so that gas pump is cycling on and off. And now we can see all of these generators up and running, so they're doing their thing. All the liquid is flowing down, so every once in a while we'll see this liquid pump turn on. So you can see its pressure is building up here, building, 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 and then there it goes, it runs off. So a little bit of that liquid went out. So one of the last questions is whether or not the steam geyser can keep up with all the clean water that's needed to run this system. So let's just do this number. So for that experiment, I have the steam geyser way up here, and then we're going to see whether or not this water level rises or drops as we run through a bunch of cycles. Temperature-wise, I'm not in the danger zone just yet. We are up to 80 degrees on these power transformers. They can go up to 125 though. And the generator over here can go up to 125. And that's only at 77 at the moment. Alright, so I've noticed something with the gas system here. I'm ending up with blockages, which is causing my generators to not be able to run as much as I need them to. So I gotta solve this problem, or I'm never gonna get the most out of my system. Because I noticed my numbers were a little bit low, which is kind of weird. So if you actually look at some of the results here from like 320, you see how this is just about 2,000. Actually, it's under 2,000 kilojoules right there when it's blocked up. And then watch what happens when I start messing with the gas. It goes up 2,000, 2,100. And then today it's just climbing much, much quicker. What I should hopefully see is a number that's 3,200 and some. That's what I want to see. Okay, so I have more inefficiencies here with this air scrubber. It's not able to deliver the liquid pipe. So that's getting blocked up as well. Alright, so the numbers are getting closer. I'm at 2,500. So I keep making more and more power each day. And I know that my calculations, so long as they're right, should get up to 3,274. In order to do that, though, I need to have the system running perfectly. I can tell you right now, the answer of a question is that no, the steam geyser cannot keep up with the water requirements for this system. You will need more than one steam geyser to keep up with the water requirements for this. Alright, so I've got a new problem. I've now started to turn some of my polluted water into steam. I was getting real close to having my efficiency get over 3,000 here, but now I'm losing some of that because it's becoming too hot. So cooling with just the runoff of the natural gas generator and the carbon dioxide that it's exhausting doesn't seem to be the right plan of action there. Alright, so day 3 of this experiment. And a couple of things that I've noticed thus far is that I just have some inefficiencies that are causing some problems here. And it's mostly around the liquid system and getting all the correct polluted water to the fertilizer maker. The second big problem is the fact that these natural gas generators are overheating. So I think I'm going to try to fix both of these problems with one solution. Instead of running these air scrubbers directly into the fertilizer makers, I'm actually going to run it up here and use the liquid to cool the natural gas generators, just like I was doing in the previous setup. So therefore, everything is going to come out of this liquid pump, and then I'll use a couple of liquid valves, hopefully, to meter out everything that is going to these fertilizer makers. Alright, so this is the path of the liquid discharge for the air scrubbers. It'll both travel up to the top and then hopefully drip down from there. Okay, so we can see that the liquid drops coming out of this vent right here have drastically cooled the top natural gas generators, but it's not really cooling down the ones below it, although they are getting a little cooler. I think what I want to do is go ahead and deconstruct that tile. Kind of get this thing to drip around a little bit. Yeah, there we go. See, things are cooling off now. Alright, so I set most of these to 79 now. Let's see how this works. I should hopefully end up with a lot more flow to all of these fertilizer makers. And hey, that seems to be working a little bit better. That's more what I wanted to see. Yeah, there we go. Much better. So a couple of the generators right here are not having a constant flow into the actual unit. So it might be worthwhile to drop this a little bit just to see if that makes any difference. So the idea of trying to meter down these gas valves is to try to even out the flow into the generators. We'll see if this works or if I gotta do something a little bit different. You know what, from the looks of it, it's still kind of biased to these top generators and the bottom one. These two are still kind of intermediate a little bit. Okay, so here's what I'm going to do. I'm gonna add a couple of gas valves before I have the split between the two generators. So I'll feed into this one and then I'll separate out from there. And that'll be at the capacity of 2 generators. And then I'll do the same here. And then for the 3 down at the bottom, I'll have 1 more, but that'll be just for those 3. I'll have to take care of that over here, though. Alright, so it looks like the gas system here is working a little bit more even. It seems to be separating out quite well. If we take a look back at what's going on here, we see that 4 generators are running at full capacity. And then these other 2 kind of float a little bit, but they seem to continue running. Let's just go ahead and take a look at some of the reports here. So yesterday was 3,035, so that was pretty good. Looking at the temperatures, we can see that things are a lot more even now. Look at this. Much better. Okay, so yesterday's report was 3,133. Yeah, there we go. So 3,133. That is really not that far off of where I want to be. Now, how much energy should I be expecting to use? That's a good question. 1,408. However, the difference here is in the duty cycle for the polluted water. I've just increased that because instead of just needing to work off of the natural gas generators, I also have to handle the air scrubbers. So let me go ahead and change that equation. Okay, so that went from 0.05 up to 0.23, so that did use up some more. A little bit more kilojoules in a day, but not much. Alright, so get this. The liquid system over here is actually backing up now. So this liquid pump can't pump because the pipe is blocked. And all of these fertilizer makers are constantly running. Which means that my maximum duty cycle, that was at 15.58, doesn't seem to be matching what I can get out of the game in real life. There's a good chance I could run another fertilizer maker in here. Okay, so here's an interesting observation. I've let this system turn off for a little bit, and all of this liquid is finding its way to the fertilizer makers. So it's actually cleared out quite a bit of space there. So there might be something to running liquid valves at a metered rate that might let you get a little bit more out of this than what you might be able to calculate or expect. Which might explain why it seems like I might be able to run more fertilizer makers than I should be able to. Alright, so now I got the system set up just right. I was messing myself up for a little while with these flow controls, and that was causing me to retain more polluted water, then I would use more polluted water, and the whole system was kind of doing this number quite a bit, and I wasn't getting good data because I wasn't doing the test right. But now that I have these flow controls set just right, at 150, which is what the fertilizer makers actually consume per second, these things are running optimally when they have liquid to them. Now, per the duty cycle that I was calculating previously, they're not running constantly. Or shall we say, they're not all of them are running constantly. Some of them are running while others are not. Now, if you take a look at these natural gas generators, you'll notice that they don't necessarily run all day. It actually relies a little bit on what's coming out of this natural gas geyser. So as this is running, you'll see these start to fill up and run a little bit more. And then they'll kind of peter out a little bit when it's, idle. So a couple of more cycles and then I'll actually be able to do a nice bench test here to see just how much electricity I am producing in the system that seems like it is now balanced. Alright, so the results are in for this natural gas power plant over here. So starting at cycle 412, I went all the way up to 450 in this experiment. What we can see here is that on 412, I was at 239 kilojoules. And this number slowly increased before it started to plateau. So when we put this into a line graph, we can see the amount of kilojoules I have over here on the left compared to whatever cycle I was down there. And we can see that we've really started to stabilize here within the last 25 cycles. So with that in mind, if we focus on cycle 426 down to 450 and average those numbers out, this is the results that we end up with. Our average ends up at 3,269 kilojoules per cycle. Of that, 1,448 kilojoules is used in the production of that power, giving us a net daily yield of 1,820 kilojoules. So when we compare the theoretical calculation to the real-world experiment, we'll see here that the total kilojoules a day right here between the tested and what was predicted was within 5 kilojoules a day. The amount that was used was within 13.39 kilojoules a day, giving us a total difference on average of 18.6 kilojoules. So in watts, that's a difference of 31 watts on average throughout the entire day right there. Or one final way of looking at this is that my calculation was 99.84% accurate. Well, there you have it, guys, from theory to practice, and this all wraps up one of the longest and most challenging videos I've ever made here on YouTube, and I think it was absolutely awesome. I mean, it's so cool what you can actually do in this game right here, and honestly, doing this sort of calculation stuff right here is some real legitimate engineering, so that's pretty cool to see that coming into the videos as well. So if you guys enjoyed this video or found it somewhat informative or enjoyable, let me know down there in the comment section below. And if I've earned your subscription, then thank you so much for that. Hopefully I'll see you again in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day. Stay awesome. Peace. Brothgar out.